Hey everybody, welcome back to your Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldai, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We are closing out a month dedicated to future industry, and this month was sponsored by Airspace Link. This episode is doubly special because it's part of the Volatus Above and Beyond series, and we have two incredible guests with us, two for the price of one. We've got Chris Howe. He is the lead operating officer of the Canadian Advanced Air Mobility Consortium. I always forget that, Chris. I always think initiative, but it's consortium. And Jacob Taylor is the CEO of Indigenous Aerospace. They are coming to us live from Canada. So we are going to be talking a little bit about what's happening north of the United States border here in the world of advanced air mobility and drones with these two amazing people. So, by the way, of course, this is live, and Dan Julin is already jumping in into the chat from Arium Analytics saying good morning all. So good morning there, Dan. Thanks for showing up. And everybody else out there, like, make sure you're jumping in, saying hi, tell us where you're from, ask questions, because these two are on the leading edge of advanced air mobility and drone integration with Indigenous peoples and all kinds of diverse groups to help lead the future of the industry. So this is going to be a great show. So let me start with a little bit about each one of you. So Jacob, let's start with you. Kind of 30-second elevator speech background. I know it's hard to squeeze all that into 30 seconds, but tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from, and let us get to know you a little bit.
First Nation concepts related to health and well-being in our modern Canadian society. After graduation, put that to work as an entrepreneur, founded a company called Pontiac Group, and we were a leading economic development consultation firm in Canada over the last 6-7 years until I arrived at Indigenous Aerospace and founding Indigenous Aerospace. So I currently, as you noted, I'm the CEO as well as president of the board for our operations across Canada.
Amazing. We're going to talk a little bit more, obviously, about Indigenous Aerospace in a second. But before we do, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great. Well, Jacob, I love you sharing your journey to get into aerospace. I think upon entering aerospace, I realized that everybody else seems so much more qualified than me in aerospace. They had a whole career and a whole lexicon that I was unfamiliar with. But my background is from the West Coast. A lot of my history and career has been in tech startups, trying to move fast and break things, which is the opposite of what you want to do in aviation. Is you want to move slow and do safe things. So I am now a new entry, really trying to coordinate all the different projects and initiatives to try to help this industry move forward as the ecosystem develops. So that's a bit more about me, and really happy to be here.
It's so funny you say that, Chris, because on our other show, The Full Crew, we had Jack Witherspoon from Airspeeder, and he's all about like crashing things and breaking things because he wants to show that this is safe. Like even when you crash, you live. So it's all about perspective. But so let's stick with you, Chris, then we'll go back to Jacob. Tell us a little bit about CAAM. What exactly is this nonprofit organization that you're such a part of?
Yeah, so really it came together from a synthesis of recognizing in Canada that we have a bit of a gap in trying to plan for the future of aviation. We have these new technologies that are coming online rapidly. We saw with RPAS and drones that the technology moved faster than the regulations ever could. And then it created a tension between the public and the government who supports the public in understanding how to move forward and bring these technologies to market safely. And then you have industry doing amazing work and trying to move that forward. So we tried to build a consortium of industry, academia, and government to try to identify what government was afraid of, understandably, and build projects in collaboration with everyone to try and move the industry forward most effectively. So really, it came together as a collaboration group to meet an unmet need in Canada. And we're lucky to have many different members, over 80 members, that are trying to work towards that goal via various projects and initiatives. So yeah, that's what we're up to.
All right, awesome. And I know you collaborate also with Jacob's group. So Jacob, tell us about Indigenous Aero. Why did you created it, right?
Yeah, so I founded it in partnership with Indigenous Aerospace, as I was seeking a partner at that time that could help me build capacity within community for First Nation people to use drone technology to improve quality of life in their own local context. And that is our mission of today. And our vision is First Nation people doing remote piloted aircraft system work in their local territory. It's a wonderful ambition. We came together July 1st, 2021 to make this a reality. And I mentioned it on the Clubhouse last week. Some of the listeners will be familiar that July 1st, 2021 in Canada, we had a really strong Cancel Canada Day activism movement at the time, as Canada federal government was seen as not fulfilling its responsibilities under treaty and not fulfilling the Truth and Reconciliation Commission findings, which came out with 94 calls to action in 2016. And so when CEO of Volatus, Glenn Lynch, and myself came together, we discussed making a company that would work on the mandates of TRC, which can be summarized in two forms. One is educating people on the realities that Indigenous Canadians face and have faced, and the other is supporting opportunities for them to participate in the Canadian economy. And so Indigenous Aerospace works to educate people on the realities community face, how the drones can be a solution to that, and put those solutions into the hands of the people who live there.
I love that, Jacob. And for everybody, if you missed last week's Clubhouse with Chris and Jacob and Maggie Schuster, go back and listen to that on demand. It was absolutely spectacular. So really great conversation. And I love that you partnered with Volatus on this to help Indigenous peoples. Jacob, one thing that I learned a lot by listening to you, honestly. One thing that I never really thought about was the concept you brought up of, we were talking about the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma here in the United States, and how they've been involved deeply from the beginning with the FAA and the integration pilot program and now beyond, and how they have the Daisy Ranch out there near Durant, Oklahoma. And you talked about how sometimes around the world, people will partner with Indigenous peoples to test out their concepts in a safe space. Give me your perspective on that, because honestly, it was very eye-opening to me and something I never thought about.
Yeah, when I first left Western University after my graduate program, which is a master's in First Nation policy leadership, I was working as a policy analyst in a community just north, Saugeen First Nation, and the then chief, Vernon Root, who was a great mentor to me then as I was progressing into economic development through a long journey that led me there. He said, a lot of industries have came to Canada, and I've seen them use community and generate themselves in community, and I don't want to see that. And at the time, we were actually discussing the cannabis industry, and where I got that lesson. And Pontiac Group was instrumental in helping First Nation communities participate in that nascent industry. And, a lot of the learnings to a new industry development are great practical experiences that I have now as the CEO of Indigenous Aerospace and the unfolding of the drone sector. But we can even look at some of these opportunities that are going on in the drone sector and see that many Indigenous communities around the world are the early sites of adoption for some of this cutting edge technology. but I would like to see community actually have a strong equity and leadership position in this to be able to steer the market more in their favor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you don't want is, a company coming in, proving out their concepts, and then taking their equipment and going home and applying it somewhere else to make a bunch of money and kind of leaving the people that helped them get where they were in the first place behind, right? So, that's just a point well taken. I love that you're doing actual training. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, Jacob. But before we do, I want to pivot back over to Chris because we're talking about workforce development at this point, and I know CAAM has been super instrumental in trying to educate industry, academia, really the general public about the need for a diverse workforce to make this future industry actually, no pun intended, fly. By the way, everybody, I met Chris during a Women in Advanced Air Mobility event. I think it was 2 years ago online.
Yeah.
I think it was knee deep in COVID.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It was online, and that's where I met Chris initially. I was part of that spectacular event. So you're focused not on just not just on one singular group. You work with Indigenous peoples, you work with women. I know J.R. Hammond, I think he also, in your group, sponsored a LGBTQ plus event. So tell us a little bit about that. You kind of alluded to working with Transport Canada and some of the regulators in industry, but this inspiration to inspire the future workforce and how you're doing that.
Yeah, I think it really came out of our own personal values in believing that this industry can do great things, not just in the air on the technology side, but really to innovate and create a better future. And that's not just technologically, that's not just about increasing access through the technology, but also for the people that are employed by this industry. And when we look at the historic demographics of the aviation industry, it hasn't always been so diverse. But I think if you take aviation's track record of safety and ensuring safety, now we're in this new age where safety also includes psychological safety, emotional safety, and making people feel seen and heard at all levels of an organization. And I think executives, for the most part, are trying to take this seriously, but are uncertain. And when you find pockets of people that want to do this work that are often either not in a position of power or forming echo chambers with themselves in saying, yes, this isn't good enough, but we don't know what to do, or we've said the same things over and over again. And unfortunately, it's people that look and sound like me as a white, heterosexual, cisgender man that often are systemic challenges. So it's really interwoven in the fabric of our society. But what's exciting about this new industry is we need tons of new people. We need to create this safe new industry. And like Jacob and I, neither of us were steeped in a PhD in aerospace engineering to get involved in this nascent industry. So there's so many diverse skill sets that are needed, and it's not just going to be possible to fill them with people who look and sound like me. So we're really excited about this work, and we're really hopeful that we can bring people together on these shared challenges.
No, I love that. And to both of your points, diversity is not just about what you look and sound like. It's also just the perspective you bring. I mean, Jacob, you said, you were kind of involved early in healthcare. That was your background in education. Chris, you were involved in other emerging technologies that kind of move fast, break them quickly, type, which is different. Look, I'm a lawyer. I came from a military background. And fun fact, I just got my Part 107 license. So now I'm a certified, I just yesterday got
Congratulations.
my official, I guess, a provisional certificate in the mail there or online. They're sending me the official one in the mail. But, just the different ideas that people bring forward. And by the way, we've got Joaquin Roybal out there saying good morning, everyone from New Mexico. Glad to see great work y'all are doing. So thank you, Joaquin. I know you were up last week as well, and he's saying lots of diversity here in New Mexico. Native American tribes definitely could use the economic development here. So Joaquin, you should connect with Jacob and Chris after the show. Follow them on LinkedIn, DM them, because I'm sure there's some great lessons learned here about how to do this, and we're going to try to talk a little bit about that. Maybe that's a perfect segue, actually. Back to you, Jacob, because here we have Joaquin saying, look, we have amazing groups here. Like, how do we even start? And, you were blessed to have, Volatus, to partner with and say, yeah, let's do this thing together. You created this company. What tips would you give someone like Joaquin on how you can start a group like yours to help foster this this industry as well as community, both as a win-win?
Sure. I mean, on the Indigenous Aerospace website, there's a acronym drone on the homepage that'll give you a good start. They're like, D is a decolonial framework, right? Like it's putting the power in the hands of the community, having them determine how the project goes down, what the best use cases are for their needs and wants. And R is having respectful relationships, essentially, that are reciprocal in nature. They're not just benefiting one party. The O is ownership, control, access, and possession, which is a data sovereignty initiative that's came out of Canada from both academic and nonprofit circles. So, community really having control over the dissemination of whatever information is collected. And as natural law, so, how we're respecting the environment and sustainability practices and everything that we do. And E is economic development. So are you helping the community to produce own source revenue? And this is a really good framework to start out at with any remote piloted aircraft system project, and really any type of economic development project that you're going to be undertaking in your area.
I love that. And again, being former military, there's my, my my flag in the background. Acronyms, right, are something that we live and die by in the military. That's a great acronym. I love that, Jacob. That's so good and easy to remember, and maybe difficult for some people to live by, but important to live by if you're working with Indigenous peoples. So let's talk about some of the training then. I'm going to talk to you, Jacob, and then I'm going to punt it back over to Chris. Let's talk about some of the training you're doing. And I think we have a picture or two that we can pop up.
Sure, yeah, let's bring up the photos. It'll give it more context.
Yeah. So tell us about this. This looks like Sioux Valley, Dakota Nation.
Yeah, so this is, just north of the US-Canadian border there at North Dakota, Manitoba provinces. Those folks are leading a residential school inspection project in their local territory, formerly known as the Brandon Indian Residential School. And they're working to identify unmarked graves. And so it's kind of a four-part process of analyzing the historical record, survivor stories, LiDAR data of the territory to identify areas of interest, and then using a ground penetrating radar unit to scan over it for geomorphic anomalies. And so that work is really important work that photo is identifying and reflecting. Oh, sorry, I got distracted by the little purple thing. I don't know if the audience sees that too. So anyways, that's one of the things that's going on in community. And, the LiDAR training and programming that we're doing in community is not only supporting that really important work, which helps to hold the government of Canada to accountability, but in other ways, it's helping to document the environmental impacts on traditional and real territory, as well as historical and current land use case in territory, which in Canada and the United States is very important for First Nation government, as we have strength of claim tests put before us in courts all the time when we're arguing treaty claims and other contractual obligations between the nation-to-nation relationship that we have. So that, same training that those folks get in the LiDAR is applicable in other areas, and lands departments, corporate departments, legal departments within community all use that data for very significant purposes.
Well, that's advanced operations right there. So that presupposes that folks are getting maybe initial certification training. I know in the United States, like I said, we have Part 107. You have an equivalent up there with Transport Canada. Are you doing that initial training as well, and then steeping people in advanced operations like mapping using LiDAR and things that you just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michael, if you can pull up that photo you did before, that's
Is
one of
the
the great.
gentleman with his controller?
Yeah, right here. So,
Oh, I
I
love
got a
that.
yeah, I got a couple Indigenous students there that are really engaged in learning with Randy Green, one of the senior officers within the Volatus Aerospace Corp. Because of course, being partner companies, we extend resources to each other, and that's really one of the reasons we came together. Is all the great people within Volatus, very talented. Randy himself, an amazing instructor. All the students in the Indigenous communities that we work with love him and stay really closely in touch with them. Send them photos of their dogs after they're born. Like really good relationships being formed. And he's been instrumental in getting people their small advanced license in Canada. Really want to put as much training with that initial certification, pilot certification in people's hands, because the technology and the licensing is going to start progressing pretty rapidly, right? And it already
Yes.
has over the recent years. And so getting on board and really understanding your basics right now is of crucial importance to be participating later. And
Yes.
so that's a lot of the work we do, a lot of the stuff I advocate for in community. And so I think we have another couple more photos from training as well. You can just see like the students here. So this group of folks are looking to use the drones for water protection purposes, actually, and monitoring all sorts of activity near the waterways, fish patterns within the water, algae bloom growth, other type of invasive species growth, as well as natural species growth. So folks are really starting to use these drones to, again, hold people to account, right? What's going on? Okay, great. That's the last photo there in community. And as you see those folks jumping up, it's really an exciting thing for them. And there's a teepee in the background in a couple of those photos, which is an important thing to highlight as well, because we host these events in community. We bring it to where the people live so that the lessons are real. And
Yes.
we're also merging tradition and technology. So we're having them in these places that are stimulating to the mindset that Indigenous Aerospace is trying to cultivate, which is using the drones to support it for things that are distinctly Indigenous.
I love that. And what spectacular photos. Chris, your training, shall we say, at least the training that I've been personally involved
Yeah.
in, very, very different. Tell us a little bit about some of the events that you've hosted. And yeah, well, let's just start there.
Yeah. So a lot of the events we've hosted around bringing people together, fortunately in COVID, everything went digital. Previously, we
Right.
may have had to fly to separate conferences to meet and host workshops, whereas we've really lowered the barrier of access for people to engage in topics around aviation. So some of the events have been around updating people on the great work that is being done by many different companies across Canada and internationally. We brought in speakers. We've also hosted workshops for various Indigenous groups that are interested in learning about these new technologies and their application, much like the work that Jacob is doing at Indigenous Aerospace. And we've also hosted a series of uplift events, we've called them, focusing on uplifting women, uplifting LGBTQ2 plus peoples and Indigenous peoples, and helping see themselves in this industry. Kind of what Jacob was referencing as well. I love how we can bring these technologies to community and to people instead of in past traditional aviation. It's been very difficult. We have a large infrastructure build that's required in a very large city with lots of complex skill sets in order to make this whole system fly. But now we can bring these technologies in a suitcase and within minutes have people experimenting and experiencing the benefits of how this can experientially and tangibly benefit them. So I think it's a really exciting time in aviation. We just need to make sure that we have the safety measures in place to do that. But broadly, it's been a lot of fun to be in this industry.
Well, and economics, that's a word Jacob used earlier, is a big part of this. I think traditional aviation is a significant barrier to entry for a lot of people. I have a young man that's friends with my son here. He's now going through pilot training. His dad's a commercial airline pilot, and I mean the loans he has to take out to do something like that. Like you said, he has to go to a certain place, and perhaps for good reason, right? I mean, when we're
Yeah.
talking commercial airliners and you have a bunch of passengers on board, safety always is first, as it is in the drone industry. But what I love about drones, and hopefully in the future advanced air mobility, is the lower, at least for drones, the lower barrier to entry, as you said, showing up with a suitcase, you know, at the location where the people are that you're going to train, opening that suitcase and literally off you go. So I think that's incredible. But let's talk for a minute about money, because even buying that little suitcase with that little drone in there, depending on which little drone we're talking about, could be like thousands of dollars. Like seriously, when when I passed my test, I'm like, all right, I want to buy something made in North America. I started looking around, and a friend of mine who sells drones, he's like, well, the Paragon off of USA is pretty good, but it's going to cost you a bit. I was like $7,000 US. And I'm like, I'm not going to have like a drone business probably. I don't know what I'm going to do with my license. I want to definitely get stick time and get out there and experience it. But, I'm like, that's a big investment. That's like a car payment. So that's hard for people. Like, yeah, you can buy a smaller Chinese drone probably on the cheap. But Chris, tell us about, you guys just received a grant.
Yeah.
And everybody out there, I think that's listening, is very interested in like, show me the money. Like, where can I find some money for this kind of thing? Jacob, I'm sure Joaquin in New Mexico is like, all right, I can look at your drone acronym, but how do I actually find the money to do something like this? So Chris, let's start with you, and then I'm going to go over to Jacob on that
Great.
question.
We are very lucky in Canada to have a federal government that does strategically support with grants. You can argue it's not even close to enough money, but when you compare it to other countries like the one south of us, there's even less probably available of these types of funding to do it the not capitalist way. So we apply for these grants. It takes still a lot of work, but we're lucky to have access now to a small pool of capital and just some resources to fund our salaries to be focused on this work for the next 3 years and help bring in some experts to also help us. And the focus is really not trying to create anything new. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a new problem, nor is it new for aviation, but trying to identify the pockets of good work that is already being done in the aviation ecosystem in Canada and trying to amplify it. Even if we find things in the States or in New Mexico or any place where we can find areas where there is traction and amplify that for the benefit of the Canadian aviation sector is really what we're hoping to do for the benefit of raising the voice of visible minorities, raising the voice of women, and raising the voice of Indigenous peoples. So that's what we're so excited about. It's a 3-year project and we're just getting started. We're just signed the ink on the grant, and we're so excited to kind of start identifying these initiatives and these people that might want to be a part of this collaborative. So definitely look out, follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to our email list, and we'll have lots more information coming out about the progress of that project.
And speaking of acronyms, I believe there is one here. It's WORBE or something like
Yes.
that. WORBE, the Workplace Opportunity Removing Barriers to Equity.
Yes.
I love that they use the word equity instead of just diversity, because equity, has a different connotation, right? Equality, perhaps even better, in my personal opinion. But Jacob, over to you. So you've been partnering with Volatus, which is amazing. We're partners with them too, and we love them. Where else have you been successful, perhaps, finding funding to help your endeavors with the folks that you're working with?
Sure. I definitely think we got to go with equity more than equality, just touching on the last point, because equality, it's like all three of us get an equal portion, but of course different groups have been disadvantaged over time and need more resources. It's like a classic cartoon out there with the difference between equality and equity, and 3 people, a man, an adolescent, and a baby, are trying to watch a baseball game over a fence. They each get a box. They all stand in the box. The adolescent can now see over. The man could always see over. The baby still can't see. So we take that box from the man and give it to the baby. The adolescent gets 1 box. This is equitable distribution. Now everyone sees the baseball game. Of course, if we could just remove the fence and have an open field, but that's not the way our capitalist society is working. So,
well, in the United States, someone would get hit by a ball and then get sued. So that's why they have the fence. But your point. No, this is what I was telling you, everybody. Like, Jacob is very wise, and once again, you've schooled me, because look, women, we get, I forget how many less cents on the dollar than men globally for the exact same work. So I'm going to embrace your idea of equity and take back my former statement. So
Yeah, no problem.
okay.
Yeah, and then for accessing capital, of course, that's hard for any business. Uh, and in Canada, and for walk-in and other Native American listeners in the States, like we just have different setup between U.S. and Canada. And Canada, we do have a paternal relationship with our economic development and really with all of our development in community. It's something like 3% of the overall funding that comes from federal sources into Indigenous community coffers is for economic development purposes. So it's the limited window within the whole umbrella of funding. And traditionally, that money favors conservative projects, that is, projects that are well proven out, and our drone industry is at a nascent level. And so it has been difficult for community to access capital to participate in the RPAS sector thus far. However, this year I'm seeing a really strong transformation of that within our funding pockets in Canada. And that's cool. Diffusion of innovation takes time to get across the landscape. And so I keep my ear to the ground on it, so to speak, and watch its development. And it is moving in a positive direction, and communities are accessing that. And as more data is available, we get into that proven out pocket and can start to access more of the funding. And I presume it's going to be very similar in the United States, although I have less experience with that. It's just these things are going to take time, but we got to keep knocking on the door and making the noise.
Well, to your point, I could see where governments would not want to fund every good idea fairy that's not proven, right? They want to have that money go to something that's tried and true. And you're right, the industry is still somewhat nascent, but I think those use cases are being proven out on a daily basis. And so hopefully more and more opportunities will continue to arise in that respect. But let's talk about some of those proven use cases, Jacob. And I'd like to focus on you because not only are you doing some of obviously the initial training with folks, you're doing this advanced training. They're using it in real world scenarios, like you said, for like archaeological and heritage purposes. I remember the story you told Maggie on Clubhouse, which I'd love for you to repeat here. Real world scenario that actually saved lives. With regards to an oncoming flood. Can you share that one with us? Because I think this one, we don't hear enough, honestly, drones for good stories, like this, that actually, other than, occasional search and rescue or something along these lines, this was very significant.
Yeah, it's a cool story. And for people watching, it's right at the end of the Clubhouse show, so you'll have to listen right to the end to get to it.
You do.
But I guess you might hear it again here. So, all across Canada, communities are in really remote locations, and the remote locations are often only accessible by winter road or aircraft. And so, being in a very remote place that's only accessible by winter road, you can have extreme changes in your climate, and more so with climate change happening today. And a lot of these communities are close to rivers because, of course, fishing being a traditional way of life and a way we still feed ourselves today. So communities are near these strong water bodies. As climate change is progressing, they're increasingly, water levels are rising. And so communities have taken ways to measure this change as when the waters rise significantly, particularly in the spring, there can be an overflow of water that leads to flooding, and that flooding can be quite strong and severe. And oftentimes, many communities have to be evacuated, and they are planned for this. They have hotels that are empty and waiting for evacuee season, as the hotel operators know it does. But it's flood season for people in communities. And so historically, they've had to go very far upriver to check the river to monitor for the danger that can be forthcoming, usually south of the water body. And they do that with like dog sled in a very traditional means, or more modern with snowmobile and four-wheeler. But these events can take, hours to get to, hours to get back. And let's be honest, we're all human beings. And how many times, if you could be, not out there in the cold to check on all of this, would you skip it, right? So it's a little bit hard. And doing it with a aircraft, as some communities do employ helicopter pilots to do this work, is significantly expensive. And so
Yes.
how they do this is have water markers all along the riverway. So all you really have to do is go and check and see where the buoys and the water markers are. But a young man in Northwestern Ontario had the idea to use his Mavic 2 to do this inspection work on the waterway, and flew it up, and sure enough was able to see that the levels were way too high and at a dangerous level of height. And so he was able to take that footage to his chief and council, which are the authority in the region, and they were able to coordinate with the provincial bodies that support the evacuee services, flying people in and out and getting them into these hotels. And it all happened in a prudent manner. And they were able to get people off the land before there was flooding. And sure enough, there was flooding. And so it's a really remarkable story of a really simple use case for a drone. The Mavic 2 is an advanced drone, so you do have to have that license to operate. And, the knowledge to operate, of course, makes you safer and able to get that data back to be able to show it to the relevant people. So, a really good story about positive use case and demonstrating the potential of this technology to really transform people's lives on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd mentioned the kind of the fishery, kind of algae application as well. Sustainability is a word we hear a lot in the industry, but are there other similar things, Jacob? And then I want to talk to Chris a little bit about the zero emission advanced air mobility strategy in Canada and their CAAM's work with that. But obviously, nature is a big part of your culture. So how else are you utilizing drones to further sustainability and assist with what we find in nature today?
Some of the things that are coming to mind right now: community using the drones to keep a local forestry operation to accountability and transparency mechanisms within their relationship. Make sure they're replanting the trees that they say they are, and that they're planting a diverse species of tree, not just monoculture, one that's good to grow fast and be cut down again. Really respecting the landscape in that regard. And so that's a fantastic use as well of drone from simple aerial photography type application. Also with sustainability and food, caribou, moose being a really important food staple. People are using it for the conservation of those species within their area, to monitor their population migration patterns and habitat health. So these are some of the things that are really crucial to sustainability. And as well, we have a cool young person program called the Litter Project, where we go in and young people scan their traditional territory, and we identify garbage within the region, right? And then generate community litter cleanup programs and go and collect that and then scan over it and see, by percentage how much we've picked up. So lots of different sustainability ways that the drones can be an important tool in this future.
That is so cool. And Chris, sustainability is something that the advanced air mobility community early on is trying to build as part of its culture. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in Canada, maybe from a governance standpoint, and how CAAM is involved in that.
Yeah, I think it's been a great opportunity to start looking at how we can evolve. Obviously, aviation and getting in the traditional aviation sense to transition to these zero emission technologies is not going to happen overnight, but it's been amazing to engage with leaders of these large organizations who are very knowing that this transition does need to happen and trying to find ways of moving towards that. And so I think that's been really moving, that people on the ground may not see, trying to implement innovative programs or ticketing systems to allow for, say, in the case of in the future for SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, perhaps having it produced and filled up in one airport where they're close to that station, and have a ticket system where you can actually buy SAF and fill up with regular fuel at another airport and be able to buy that SAF, but maybe you're not flying with it. But it's a way of spurring the economic growth and the investment in the utilization of these new types of technologies so that we can grow it through these early growing pains instead of having a perfect systemic solution happen overnight. So it's been great to hear these types of programs, as we know that we have hydrogen, battery electric, and other types of hydrogen fuel cell coming online slowly. It's been great to see that momentum. I think in tech, sometimes you can dream something up and within a week you can have a minimum viable product launched and going, and it's exciting, and then you can build and test. And so I think initially it was frustrating for me to say, well, why can't we just do this sustainability thing? Like, what are the barriers? And I think once I saw the scale and really engage with these amazing executives that are trying to make this progress, I started to see the complexity of this global level infrastructure challenge. So it's been a great challenge to work on. It's been growing my patience, and I'm excited to see how this develops, especially in the RPAS industry. Jacob, those are awesome use cases that you brought up, and we also hear about those with some of our RPAS operators, very similar. The only ones I didn't hear mentioned was something about fireplace and emergent or wildfire management. Happens a lot up in Canada, and trying to map out to understand where and how fires may be a risk factor in burning down communities, as well as the emergency services mapping when a fire is ongoing. But some amazing use cases, and just so exciting that someone can have a drone, have the skills, and say, hey, I can help my community, or I can do something here. It's a really empowering feeling.
Yeah, it is. And, the world has been on fire literally for like the past 2 years, if anybody's been actually watching that. And, all of these issues are global issues, right? They're not limited to Canada, US, they're everywhere. Chris, speaking of that, and we're getting super close on time, but I don't want to close out without showing these cool pictures of your colleague JR in Japan, because, CAAM has reached beyond the borders of Canada, right? Here's JR. He's the tall guy, by the way, in Japan. So give us a second on, kind of what you're seeing in Japan and how JR got involved there. And then what we're going to do is just give each of you, just the floor to talk a little bit about what we can expect in the future and how people can reach you. Okay. So Chris, go ahead. Let's talk Japan, and we'll go back to Jacob.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very lucky to be led by J.R. Hammond, our enigmatic leader, who is just so passionate about the future of this industry. Sometimes I have to rein him back in because he's so far and so excited about that future, but he's exactly the person I want in conversations like this with the Japanese government. So he was invited on a trip with the Canadian Embassy in Japan to meet with many of the large OEMs and operators in Japan and speak to them about the future of the air transportation industry. And they're very interested in advancing this and being partners in it. As you may know, for the listeners on the call, the national Japanese government, their regulations are often quite tight and do have a culture of ensuring safety. But that doesn't mean that they still don't want to be leaders. So they're looking elsewhere to places like Canada and the US to invest and partner, bringing in a Japanese company, but to be able to partner with other groups such as Canada, who might be able to iterate and build these skills and learning so that both Japan can be a leader and Canada can be a leader. And so they've actually come out. I know JR just had a meeting yesterday with some Japanese investors who are very excited about getting involved. And so when you think about that, the listener who was mentioning about, hey, how might we bring investment, or how might we get these money things in? I think we might be able to look outside of the scope of the traditional place of looking around our community for where the money is, but perhaps even looking internationally. And Jacob mentioned a great piece on recognizing these developmental issues of ensuring that those who maybe can't afford to bring these systems in aren't used in an unequal partnership, that this is an equitable partnership, recognizing that money isn't the only thing that talks, that we need to make sure we're respecting the relationships as we help each other to meet our needs. So I think it's a really great example in this Japanese context of how the Japanese have come over and are really interested in building reciprocal relationships and sponsoring and supporting the work in Canada.
Oh, very cool. So we are actually 1 minute out, but we're going to extend a little bit just to give each of you, let's just call them closing comments. So Jacob, tell us a little bit about, what you hope to see maybe over the next year, and also definitely how people can reach you.
Sure. Easiest first, jacob.taylor@indigenousaerospace.com is my email as well. Jacob Taylor on LinkedIn, as Don mentioned, good way to find me. Probably the best ways to get a hold of me. And what to see in the future is more Indigenous participation in advanced air mobility of all kinds. Chris mentioned, international investment coming into the country, seeking reciprocity in relationship. First Nation communities are about that and have very talented workforces and people to partner with in equity relationships. So as long as you do it in good spirit, then welcome.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. And Chris, how about for CAAM?
Biggest thing we would ask for is if you have diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, if you are a people operations leader listening to this or know someone who is challenged by building a better, safer workforce, please reach out to me at chris@canadianaam.com. Whether you have solutions that seem to be working in your organization or you need solutions, reach out to me. We'd love to hear from you so we can add you to our big group of people for this new grant that's coming through to support our work in the next 3 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for taking this time with us here today and also for everything you're doing and will continue to do. So everybody out there, thank you for your engagement. Thank you for watching, and we are out here.